In today's video, I want to discuss Russia, and I did a deep dive into Vladimir Putin. I have studied the Black nobility, the Jesuits, and bloodlines, but I have not really explored Russia's history or Putin, because on the world stage, Russia has been very isolated. And now that we are seeing the Russian-Ukraine war play out, just really cannot ignore it at this point. And today I'm going to talk about Russia's history and everything that's happened since the 1990s. So let's get right into it. So in order to understand what's going on with Putin's Russia and Ukraine, it's very important to understand Vladimir Putin himself. Vladimir Putin was born on October 7th, 1952. He was born in Leningrad, which was then the communist Soviet Union. His grandfather was the personal chef of communist leaders Stalin and Lenin, which is kind of crazy. Lenin ruled Russia during the First World War, and Stalin was the general secretary of the Communist Party. They were both staunch Marxists. And when Putin was a child, he enjoyed reading the works of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto, and they were actually coached by Jesuit priests. There was a Jesuit priest by the name of Augustin B., who was German, and he stated that the Jesuits created the Communist Party for one reason, and that reason was to kill the tradition of the Orthodox Church in Russia. The Orthodox Church in Russia was headed by Tsar Nicholas Romanov at the time. The Communist Jesuit Party was secretly bankrolled by the Black nobility of Rome. And it was the same time that the Jesuits came up with a master plan by having certain Jews who were loyal to the Vatican write the Protocols of Zion. And the Protocols of Zion were meant to do two things. First one was turn the world against the Jews by using them as a scapegoat, and to be a catalyst for the Inquisition against the Roman Catholic Church. So during this time, the Jesuits worked very closely with Karl Marx, Engels, Trotsky, Lenin, and Stalin. And it was during this time that gold was transferred from Germany to Russia. Karl Marx was also associated with one of the most powerful Freemasons at the time, and his name was Giuseppe Mazzini. Mazzini was closely allied with the House of Orsini, where the Grey Pope allegedly derives from. Now, Giuseppe Mazzini was a 33rd degree Freemason, and he started the famous P2 Masonic Lodge, which started the term made men. Now, made men is a mafia term. Mazzini was a globalist and a Luciferian, and he worked with Marx to push socialist agendas in Europe and America, and helped the Italian mafia expand to the United States through the rigging of professional football. There's actually a book called Interference, and it includes many links to pro football and the mafia in modern history. And of course, Karl Marx, his socialist writings were funded by the Rockefellers and J.P. Morgan, because in fact, these socialist ideas were resurrected from none other than the Knights Templar. So in the early 1900s, Tsar Nicholas Romanov II ruled Russia. He was the descendant of the House of Romanov, which was a Russian ruling dynasty for over 300 years. The 1600s to 1917 was the time that this family, the House of Romanov, ruled until the House of Romanov was executed in 1917. In the early 1900s, the Orthodox Church was spreading all over Europe to countries like Turkey, Greece, Serbia, Romania, etc. And this was a huge problem for the Vatican and the Catholic Church. And what happened was the Jesuits and the Black Nobility decided to set up the First World War. Now, at the time, the Pope was backing Germany, which was ruled by Kaiser Wilhelm. Now, Kaiser Wilhelm was the grandson of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert from the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Now, this family derives from the German House of Hohenzollern. Hohenzollern. This house has a coat of arms that has a black and white checkerboard, like you would see in Freemasonry. And they are one of the prominent original 18 families of the Black nobility. And the descendants of the House of Hohenzollern are actually still around today. Just do a Google search of House of Hohenzollern, and that is a rabbit hole in itself. Now, the House of Hohenzollern, their primary function is to run the military that protects the Bank for International Settlements. They are a Nazi military bloodline. Okay, so Kaiser Wilhelm was working with the Pope Pius at the time, and the Jesuits to expand Germany. And now this ties in the Rothschild connection. If we go back to 1815 during the Congress of Vienna, this was the Rothschilds' first attempt at the New World Order, using the debt of the European nations as leverage. And the scheme actually failed, but they were at least successful in having Switzerland declared forever a neutral sovereignty in all future wars, in order that the funding of both sides could continue with impunity and unimpeded by the conflict. Okay, so this is how they operate. They are always controlling both sides. So the Rothschilds' ambitious one world government plan failed because Tsar Alexander I of Russia refused to be bullied by the Rothschilds. He was aware of their devious plot to enslave not only his country, Russia, but the entire world itself. Nathan Mayer Rothschild vowed from that day forward that either he or his descendants, the House of Rothschild, would destroy and take down the House of Romanov. And just over 1 century later, in 1917, the House of Romanov fell. And I will get more into that, but they were murdered by the Rothschild-sponsored communist Bolshevik thugs during the so-called Russian Revolution. And in 1869, Albert Pike predicted that there would be 3 world wars in order for the banksters to install their new world order. And this would include religion being at the center of it. And in 1914, the first steps in bringing the pre-planned First World War started using Serbian nationalists. And they were a secret society called the Black Hand. So the Black Hand Secret Society was formed in 1911, and their logo was a skull, a vial of poison, a knife, and a bomb. The Serbian nationalists plotted the murder of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was a member of the Black nobility House of Habsburg. And at the time, he ruled Austro-Hungary region. And at the time, this was a supremely Orthodox nation. While Franz Ferdinand was traveling through Bosnia, he and his wife were assassinated by the Black Hand, and his murder caused upheaval and riots in the streets of Serbia at the time, which led to a decline in the Orthodox faith and Russian nationalism. So this was the first step in the demoralization of the Orthodox faith. Lenin was in Switzerland when the news broke out that the revolution was starting in Russia. And in April of 1917, Lenin and his men rode the sealed train to transport the revolutionaries. Now, this was a huge psyop. And this was all made possible by a man named Diego von Bergen, who was the ambassador to the Vatican and the Holy See and Nazi Germany. And this is what forced the Tsar at the time, Nicholas Romanov, to give up his throne, and his family was placed under house arrest. It was at this time that his government had been seized by the black nobility and the Jesuits. And like all wars, confusion was everywhere. They had the White Army versus the Red Army. And simultaneously, right before this happened, there were two men flying a plane over Mount Ararat, and they found an insane discovery. So Tsar Nicholas of Romanov agreed for the men to go on this expedition because they told him that they believed that they found the biblical Noah's Ark. All of the documents from that expedition were in the hands of the Russian missionary who was traveling to see Romanov, but he was intercepted by Trotsky and was shot to death. And then months later, on July 7th, 1914, Austro-Hungary convened a council to discuss the Serbian situation, which was now getting out of hand. And later that month, the Zionist banker-controlled Austro-Hungarian press started pumping out anti-Serbian propaganda, which only added fuel to the fire. False reports of a Serbian conspiracy against Austro-Hungary began to circulate. But in an attempt to calm the situation, Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany encouraged his ally, who was Austro-Hungary, to try to settle the matter using diplomacy. And of course, we know now that he was backed by the Pope and the Jesuits. So the plan was perfectly orchestrated. And 2 weeks later, on July 17th, 1914, the Romanov family was awakened in the middle of the night. They were ordered to the cellar of the house in which they were being held captive, and they were murdered. Moments later, these Jewish red assassins stormed in and stabbed the entire family after they had been shot. They also killed their doctor and 3 of their servants in cold blood. Now, some of the Romanov daughters were stabbed and clubbed to death when the gunfire failed to kill them outright. And news of this brutal murder of the Romanovs sent shockwaves through Russia and all of Christian Europe. And the biggest tragedy of this entire story is that nobody knew the reason why the House of Romanov was actually taken out. The real reason. The death of the Romanov family was a win for the Jesuits, the Vatican, and the black nobility. But on the world stage, it just was a political stunt. They wanted to end the dynasty. And it was written that the gold from the Romanovs, combined with the Pope's gold, was equal to $666 million. That is on record. Now, oddly enough, the new spiral tower that is going up in Tel Aviv, Israel, I don't know if it's built already. It looks like the Tower of Babel. That cost $666 million to build. Again, 666. General Motors just did a deal for $666 million in Michigan, and this was reported this month, March of 2022. Just a weird side note there. Stalin was actually quoted saying this about the Jesuits, quote, "The Jesuits are systematic in working to achieve sordid outcomes. Their principal method is spying, prying, and worming their way into people's souls and outraging their feelings." End quote. Now, I've read that the red color in the Pope's garb is symbolic of communism. And to the Romans, red was the color of war. Now, there is a famous painting of Jesuit founder Ignatius of Loyola holding a red flag. Now, this is very symbolic. And fast forward to any Russian leader, any painting, especially Lenin, They are always depicted with the same red flag. And what's really strange and a bizarre conspiracy that has emerged as of late is that Melania Trump is actually a secret descendant of the House of Romanov. Now, it was claimed that 3 Romanov boys actually survived the attack and were sent on a ship to the United States. Now, many people have claimed to be descendants of the House of Romanov, but DNA has proved otherwise. Melania Trump is kind of an enigma. She is very intelligent. She speaks over 5 languages. She seems like a typical international spy to me. And she's beautiful. And some people would argue that she was actually born a man. And that is up for argument. But what I find to be very odd is that there are many articles that have been written about her from years ago that says that she has, quote, a Romanov complex. Now, why would they say that? Such an obscure reference. Why would any reporter or journalist think of that? Especially a journalist nowadays, and we know that most journalists are actually CIA um, paid mockingbird writers. So I guess it would make sense because they would know. But still, it's like doublespeak. It's very strange to me, but it stands out to me to hear people calling her or referring to her with a Romanov complex. Now, another bizarre conspiracy I heard was that Putin himself, or Putin's little cronies, captured a secret descendant from the House of Romanov, and that he is trying to restore the Romanov dynasty in Russia. Now, if you Google Putin Romanov dynasty, since Putin's presidency, there have been many statues and obelisks that have gone up to in remembrance of the House of Romanov, which is interesting. I have also heard that there have been ancient conch shells, magical conch shells that have been discovered underground in Russia, and they are extremely valuable. And I've heard that Putin is protecting them from invaders. And I know that this conspiracy probably sounds insane to most people, but I think it makes the most sense because all wars uh, involving the Jewish banksters always revolve around resources and ancient religion. And these Vedic conch shells would be a key to something, but at this time, I really don't know. I found an article titled Putin's Plan to Restore the Romanovs. And the article asks if Putin is trying to restore the House of Romanov in Russia. And it states that he doesn't want the monarch dynasty, but more so complete control and power over the country's economy, like the Romanovs had. He wants the feudal system. He wants the feudal power. And perhaps this means he wants to return to a time when the Rothschild central banks did not dictate how the country is operated behind the scenes. And maybe not. And that's why this article is vaguely written. I wasn't sure why this article was even put out there to begin with, but it just makes everything more confusing when you're trying to figure out what's going on the world stage. So let's get back to Putin. So Putin was born October 7th, 1952 in Soviet Russia. He grew up in a poor family in a small apartment. The narrative was that he was a thug who chased rats out of his apartment. He studied boxing and judo, and when he was a teenager, he inquired about joining the KGB because it was the biggest gang in town. Those were his words. Putin was not afraid of the dark world. In fact, he felt like he belonged with the dark world. So he eventually went to college where he studied international law and became a member of the KGB. And we will never know exactly everything he did there, but we do know that he was a very important insider who was responsible for the paperwork between Germany and Moscow. And he was notorious for keeping secrets, and he was very respected and trusted. Putin resigned from the KGB in 1991 because he didn't agree with the coup against Mikhail Gorbachev. And at the time, he was against communism and believed that it was a major setback. And in the mid-90s, he worked under Boris Yeltsin. And Boris Yeltsin was an extreme alcoholic. And during this time, when Yeltsin was at his weakest, Putin kind of came out of the shadows and went rogue and created his first false flag under the president. And these were the bombings in Chechen. And there was so much confusion around the Chechnya bombings because the bombings were blamed on Chechen separatists, but they were actually thwarted by FSB officers. The FSB is the Russian security service, which Putin became the director of post this false flag, aka the Chechen bombings. And then it was reported that these bombings were actually a training exercise, which turned out to be a psyop to allow Putin to send the Chechen troops back to Chechnya to make Putin look like a war hero. And it was because of this that made Putin the man of the moment. He overpowered Boris Yeltsin with this one chess move. And he was so drunk at the time, Yeltsin couldn't even get out of bed. So the Chechnyan false flag was seen as a victory and a huge pivotal moment in Putin's career. And it's been written that after that, Putin never needed PR again. Like he had won the country over. The Russian media was used to turn Putin into a homoerotic James Bond character. He was photographed shirtless on horses, shirtless fishing in the Siberian River, and it was based on the movie 17 Moments of Spring. And I think it might have been a TV series, but it was in 1973. But this is where Putin got a lot of his image ideas. So it was life imitating art. Then in 1999, Boris Yeltsin resigned on New Year's Eve and announced Putin the new sitting president. And once Putin got into office, the Kremlin needed a backstory, so they started hiring writers to come visit Putin and talk with him. And it was revealed in these writings that Putin was very much interested in joining NATO. But he was also aware that the United States was the powerhouse of NATO, and he didn't want to compete with the United States. Putin wanted to be the powerhouse. And he was not a family man. Putin was married and had two daughters in the 80s who he never saw. And his wife, Mila, was quoted saying that Putin never held her. She was not happy. She knew that he didn't love her back, but she respected him. Putin's first presidential term started in 2000. This was the same year George W. Bush took office as President of the United States. So Putin was starting to lead with his ego and was against the Russian billionaires of the time. And one of these Russian billionaires was Mikhail Khodorkovsky. Khodorkovsky started to question Putin's decisions and actions. And shortly after that, Khodorkovsky went bankrupt and was put in prison for extortion and money laundering, and Putin went after him hardcore. And after Khodorkovsky was imprisoned, this was basically a message from Putin saying, I don't care how much money you have, no one is bigger than me. And Khodorkovsky, before he was prisoned, ran the oil company Yukos. And Putin had many scandals, hostage situations, murder, straight up murder, and killing of innocent people in his first two terms as president. But he somehow managed to divert attention. He was able to take the media in a different direction. Kind of like what they do here in the States, but Putin was the master of that, and that's his KGB training coming out. He started blaming the British. He blamed the US for his own induced terrorism. He was the king of false flags, and he blamed others all the time. in pure KGB fashion. And by 2004, oil prices were super high in Russia. The economy was booming, and he knew that the minerals Russia had were super valuable. 2004 was also the year he started his anti-West narrative, and he was reelected to his second term, but it was rigged. And it came out that Putin rigged his own election, but nothing happened. And this was also a pivotal time because we really started to see Putin as the angry, vengeful KGB officer and going away from becoming a true democratic leader, which he wanted. Those were his intentions when he became president in 2000. So the power was getting to him. He was turning into everything that he claimed he once hated. And something that people don't talk about enough, in my opinion, is how much Putin turned Russia into an imperialist country under his reign. So it was kind of like going back in time, like going backwards. And in 2007, he gave a speech condemning the West. And he said, quote, "Russia will never be part of the West. Russia is separate." And in 2008, he had to step down as president after 2 terms. But he put Dmitry Medvedev in to replace him. And Putin became the prime minister for a second time, but he was basically the shadow president. And this was the same year, 2008, that he had that crazy photo shoot with that Siberian tiger. And Putin was so late to the photo shoot. They had given this tiger 2 tranquilizers to keep him under control. By the time Putin got there, Putin tranquilized the tiger himself, took the picture with the tiger, gave it a kiss, did the photo op, got the whole thing for the media, and then the tiger died, like right after, due to the 3 tranquilizers. But that was actually hidden and never reported. And Putin looked like this animal lover. That's just totally Putin. And in 2012, he became the president again and remained there until 2018. And it was this term when he banned pedophilia and homosexual propaganda. And Putin came out hard about wanting all of the children to be protected from exposure to this. And you can't hate him for that. He also banned the rainbow flag in Russia, and he did not want any homosexual propaganda at the 24 Olympics, which was held in Sochi. This was also the same year Russia began incursions in Ukraine, parallel to the Syrian war that Barack Obama was responsible for. Putin was a sympathizer and supporter of the Syrian president at the time and talked poorly of Obama. And this was the time when Obama withdrew from Iraq and did the deal with Iran. And this was just a mess of a time geopolitically. And Obama will forever be remembered as betraying the Syrian people. And Putin to this day does not let the world forget that. Putin was blamed in 2016 for supporting Donald Trump and the denigration of Hillary Clinton. Putin said that it could theoretically be Russian hackers. And Putin is currently in his 4th presidential term. But what's really fucked up about him is that during 2020, during the COVID pandemic, Putin went in and changed Russia's constitution, and he added amendments that he can run for 2 additional 6-year term presidencies, which has never been done before, which basically makes him a banana republic leader, a dictator, never wanting to leave office, believing he is the only person that can do this job. And when you think about it, Putin has basically been the leader of Russia for 22 years now. And on December 20th, 2020, he signed into law a lifetime prosecution immunity to all ex-presidents of Russia. Now, why would he do that? Now, there's 2 theories. One, he knows all the shady shit he's done, and he never wants to be prosecuted. Or two, he knows that the globalists could infiltrate the country and somehow take him out like Saddam Hussein. But we don't know. But it's interesting. And now that brings us to the Ukraine invasion. And what makes this really interesting is that Putin was pro-Ukraine during the Orange Revolution, and he wanted Ukraine to be part of the USSR again. And it seems to me that Putin saw the globalist takeover of the West during the presidency of George W. Bush after 9/11, and then saw it increase with Obama. And by the time 2016 came around, he expressed disdain for Hillary Clinton and knew he could be prosecuted or executed by these globalists. So that is why I think maybe he wrote that into law. And on March 4th, 2020, Putin signed into law another bill introducing a 15-year sentence for anyone publishing false information about the Russian military. Now that's interesting. The International Criminal Court would investigate Russian conduct in Ukraine from 2013. And he has called the West leaders bastards. And he warned Russians that the West was trying to destroy Russia from the inside. Now, the mainstream media of the West has been attacking Putin on a daily basis. They question his mental health. They claim that he has COVID brain fog. They accused him of being a nation isolationist. Maybe he is, but maybe there's a reason for it. Even Donald Trump has spoken out against Putin in the beginning, praising him for these decisions, and then came out and said he's not even the same person. So I'm not sure what that's all about. And this, in turn, I believe, with Trump, made Putin question his so-called ally status with Trump and China. Now, this is if you believe the narrative that these countries are their own sovereign countries with leaders. This is not the black pill narrative where everybody's a pawn under the same pyramid. And it's all very confusing. So, is Putin really a Russian conservative nationalist? Or is he just a Rothschild globalist pawn to usher in the New World Order? That is the real question. It was reported that when he ordered that Khodorkovsky be arrested, what's crazy is that the shares of Khodorkovsky's company were passed on to Lord Jacob Rothschild. And as of 2003, Jacob Rothschild became the beneficiary of Khodorkovsky's oil company. Okay, that's crazy. That's an interesting twist, and that's real. And that was reported by the Washington Times. Just one report. There were others. So this means that Putin enabled the Rothschilds to take over the oil in Russia. That's what that means, because Putin put Khodorkovsky in jail. Okay? Now this leads me to David Rothschild. David Rothschild was born in 1978, and David is the son of Evelyn Rothschild, who was friends with Jeffrey Epstein, and he was in the Little Black Book of Jeffrey Epstein. And Evelyn Rothschild is the guy who introduced Jeffrey Epstein to Ghislaine Maxwell. Okay? So Evelyn Rothschild's son, David, is a Agenda 2030 pawn. He has written books about surviving global warming. He has an environmental lifestyle blog called The Lost Explorer. And he is a young leader of the World Economic Forum. And Putin at one time was a part of the World Economic Forum. And David Rothschild was named a climate hero by the United Nations. So now go Google David Rothschild and Isaac Kappy. Then go Google Nikki Hilton. All three of them look related. Like, it's uncanny. And Nikki Hilton is actually married to a Rothschild. Her name is Nikki Hilton Rothschild. And one of my friends on Instagram actually reminded me that Nikki's actual name, she was born, the name that she was given to when she was born is Nikolai, which is a boy's name. So I don't know, try to make sense of that. What's really crazy is Rothschild and Co. is a company which has operated in Moscow since the mid 90s and is currently run by Giovanni Salvetti, of course, in Italian. And what's interesting about this guy is his job at Rothschild and Co. is that he's a financial advisor to Ukraine. Giovanni Salvetti has overseen over $20 billion worth of financial transactions to Ukraine since 2007. This guy is linked to John Kerry, John McCain, Mitch McConnell, all the puppets, okay? I could go on. Okay, this same company is very influential in Canada and India. Giovanni Salvetti also oversees a Swiss company called White Rock Management. White Rock, okay? I think of Black Rock, now this is called White Rock. Okay, White Rock Management is a blockchain company connected to AI, Bitcoin, and they have launched green data centers in Ukraine and Kazakhstan. And guess what else they host? Okay, they're an iCloud service. They host Amazon Web Service and Facebook. Okay, is your mind fucking blown? Because mine is. And this is right on their website. Okay, so I don't know. After all of this investigation, that I put myself through with Putin, I mean, in my mind, it's very obvious that Putin is controlled by the Rothschilds. There's too many Rothschild connections to say otherwise. Um, and that's my black pill default, is that he is controlled and that all leaders on the world stage are 100% controlled. And the Jesuits write the script that we are all outraging to, just like Stalin said we would. And I am left with nothing but more confusion. And I reached a point during all of this where I realized that I don't have any solid answers, just a shitload of connected dots that get me nowhere. And this is like what I hate and love about doing research. It's because I want to learn, but the more I learn, literally the less I know. But I want to say one thing about the Jesuits. I recently watched the movie The Two Popes on Netflix. If you haven't seen it, I recommend watching it for more insight on the current Jesuit Pope and Pope Ratzinger. Now, the Jesuits are Marxists. They are alchemists. They are reformists. And when I used to go on podcasts and say all of the Supreme Court justices and presidents are Jesuit educated, it's because they are. Do not take somebody that has gone to a Jesuit school lightly. Okay, a Jesuit school education is far more important than an Ivy League. Trump, Biden, the entire Supreme Court are all Jesuit educated and members of Phi Beta Kappa. This is no coincidence. And this new Supreme Court nominee, Ketanji Brown Jackson, who happens to be a pedophile sympathizer, just like the Vatican, she's perfect. She is the perfect world stage actor. She was raised in Washington, D.C. Then she was relocated to the Miami-Dade area. Just remember the Miami-Dade area. I can't remember her name, that crazy bitch with the curly hair. There is so much going on in Miami-Dade area. A lot of psyops. And there have been so many shady dealings that have gone down there. And she's even related to Paul Ryan through marriage. And I believe it was alleged that Paul Ryan is a pedophile. Her brother, Ketanji's brother, served in the Iraq War, and she also worked for Time magazine before she became a lawyer. And surprisingly, she is not a Phi Beta Kappa. Now, back when Trump was going to pick a Supreme Court justice, I predicted that it would be Amy Coney Barrett, simply for the fact that she was a Phi Beta Kappa. And then she ended up getting picked. And so this is different. But Ketanji has her own little resume that lines up perfectly. So I'm not surprised either that she could be the chosen one. But she has many red flags associated with her. And think about the term red flag. Okay? Ignatius of Loyola, founder of the Jesuits. Lenin, the communists, with their red flags. You know, perhaps the term red flag came from the communists. Red flag is not a good thing. And the other thing, Ketanji married a WASP, a Boston Brahmin named Patrick Jackson, who is a descendant of Oliver Wendell Holmes, who was himself a Phi Beta Kappa and was very prominent in the eugenicist movement in the United States. Just Google Buck versus Bell and read about Oliver Wendell Holmes and his quotes about human life. And that will tell you everything you need to know about Oliver Wendell Holmes and his descendants, which happens to be Ketanji's husband. But back to Putin for a minute. You know, there are many narratives out there right now, and the narrative that he is part of the Rothschild cabal and that he is just an evil pawn, the narrative that he is completely pro-Russia and is fighting the New World Order and the globalists. If you look at his life and who he is and all of the decisions he has made on a superficial level, you will see that the narrative that he is fighting the cabal makes much sense. And then you got the story about the Ukraine bioweapon labs in which he allegedly destroyed. And then you got the Hunter Biden laptop stuff, okay? But then you have the Rothschilds and the shadow government in which Putin wanted to belong to all along. Putin was a thug looking to become the most powerful thug. He seeked it out. So what is the truth? The truth is, we don't know. And after all this research, I just find myself with a little insight, but I cannot say for certain. I mean, I would like to believe that Putin is truly fighting the New World Order. But all I can think about is Agenda 2030 and the fact that the Jesuits, with the black nobility and all their money, and the Jewish banksters, have been plotting this takeover since the mid 1800s. Okay? And these people don't even care if they live to see it. This plan is for their status, them, their family, their legacy. This is for their legacy. You know, a one world court, one world order. So this is not something to be taken lightly. This is a well thought out and executed plan, and they are going so hard right now. Like, the world stage is completely off its rocker right now. I mean, it's, if you can't see what's going on by now, I don't know. But honestly, you know, everybody likes to pretend that they have the truth and that they have the answers. And there's so many media outlets out there like Glenn Beck. I just wish he would shut the fuck up and go away, because that guy is just so annoying. And, you know, you think about like Y2K, you know, they also have been talking about food shortages coming. I do think that that could happen, only because, according to Agenda 2030, they want everybody eating bugs. And if there's no food, That's a way to push in this, eat the bugs, eat the bugs. There's no food, eat the bugs. Become a vegan, whatever. So that's where I think that could go. But they also said that during Y2K, food shortages. My mom had our basement stocked with canned goods in 1999, and then nothing happened. So I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. But nobody knows. And I think it's really stupid to pretend you know. So I'll leave you with that to do your own critical thinking. Until next time, thank you for listening. I hope you learned something, and I will see you very soon.